This special presentation was produced in high definition by WEDU, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Sarasota.
Coming up next, the Democrats hold a convention that differs sharply in tone from the Republican event in Cleveland.
Americans don't say, I alone can fix it. We say, we'll fix it together.
Donald Trump stirs up a controversy during a press conference in South Florida. Debbie Wasserman Schultz forced out as head of the DNC over her treatment of Bernie Sanders. And Senate candidate Alan Grayson loses some endorsements as allegations of domestic abuse come to light. Political Insights next on Florida This Week.
From the WEDU studios, this is Florida This Week. And now, moderator Rob Lorei.
Welcome back. This week our panelists are Barry Edwards is a political strategist, a commentator, and a Democrat. Joe Brown is a freelance political writer. Anastasia Dawson is a reporter at the Tampa Bay Times. And Jonathan Torres is vice chair of the Hillsborough County GOP Executive Committee Board and a Republican. Well, thanks for coming to the show. Great to have you here. Well, at the Democratic Convention, Hillary Clinton made history as the first female major party presidential nominee.
She gave the closing speech in Philadelphia attacking her Republican rival, Donald Trump.
Don't believe anyone who says, I alone can fix it. Yes, those were actually Donald Trump's words in Cleveland.
During the speech and several other speeches this week, Bernie Sanders supporters booed or otherwise showed disapproval to speakers who they thought had the wrong position on trade, war, and drone killings. The Democratic convention featured generals, sports stars, famous musicians, families of black men killed by police, and families of slain police officers. One of the most powerful moments on Thursday came when a Muslim American father of a soldier killed in Iraq addressed Donald Trump directly.
Let me ask you, have you even read the United States Constitution? I will gladly lend you my copy.
All right, well, I want to ask about that moment in a second, but first of all, Anastasia, did the Democrats unite at the end, or was there still some dissent there?
Well, I think if the images coming out of the convention are any indication, there was no unity reached at all. The Democratic convention was marred with booing from Bernie Sanders supporters. You know, even when Sanders offered the proverbial olive branch and said that Hillary Clinton should just be elected, they should forgo the roll call process, or nominated rather. They should forgo the roll call, and and then he left, and he took hundreds of supporters with him. So I think that was a big hurdle for the Democratic convention.
So Barry, did the Democrats kiss and make up? Do you think
the Democrats that are going to vote in this election kissed and made up? The Bernie Sanders supporters at the convention are irrelevant.
Why do you say?
Because they're the most extreme on the left of extreme progressives or extreme liberals, and they don't represent the average voters. Most of the voters on every single poll out there shows that the Bernie Sanders supporters are coming back to Hillary, if they haven't come back already, and are totally happy with her, and they're going to be very happy with her on trade issues and Wall Street. And so it's just a few extremists on the left, on the far left, that aren't happy. She's fine, and this is what always happens when you have these movements. And for the Bernie Sanders people ought to really look. In 1980, Teddy Kennedy was the left candidate against Jimmy Carter, and because of him, Carter lost. And what happens is the opposite of what you want. It took us 12 years to get back into power with Bill Clinton, who was a moderate. So if the Bernie Sanders people prevent Hillary from winning, they're not going to get a liberal in 4 years. They're going to get a moderate in 10 or 12 years.
All right,
so
Jonathan, what do you think? Did the Democrats do better than the Republicans when it comes to creating party unity at the end?
No, not at all. I mean, I'd have to agree with Anastasia's point, and even deeper so. I think it goes beyond the Bernie supporters. I mean, there were multiple factions at that convention that were adamantly opposed against Hillary Clinton. We saw Jill Stein supporters walking out of the convention wearing their green T-shirts and their Jill Stein signs. You know, we saw a lot of the protests that got moderately violent outside of the convention center as well. And then, of course, you have the Black Lives Matter movement, which certainly comes, I think, more aggressively against the Democrats because they expect more from them in terms of support. And I think overall, certainly there wasn't unity at the end of the convention, and I think there's going to be a lot of work that they're going to need to do to win that support over the next few months.
You said moderately violent, but the police and the demonstrators had one last press conference at the end and congratulated each other. Very few arrests, and fewer arrests than the police expected.
Sure, but there was shoving and fences being jumped, and you know, certainly not what we saw in Cleveland. Certainly not what we saw here in Tampa 4 years ago. And so, you know, in comparison, I would just say that, you know, it was certainly more lively, if you will, in Philadelphia than it was in Cleveland.
Joe, what do you think? Do you think the Democrats came out more unified than did the Republicans?
I won't say that. Republicans are pretty unified. I mean, you know, I thought the Republican convention was a lynch mob, pretty much. And most of the time when you have one of those, they're pretty much all in agreement. You know, shooter, killer,
jail, lock her up.
Yeah, lock her up, all that. But Democrats, no, I don't think they come out, they were unified, but I think they will be in the end. See, these Sanders supporters, these are millennials who think they're entitled to free health care and free college tuition, and but, you know, like, hey, you know.
But Hillary Clinton did say that she's going to work on those issues that Bernie Sanders supporters brought up, including health care and the cost of education.
That's a good thing that came out of it. But I think, you know, these are some kids who are just not getting their feet wet in this political cesspool that we have here. So I think come November, they'll come around.
We're at 88% of all Democrats are backing Hillary already. So in the convention, we haven't even gotten the bump from the convention yet. So just a few extremists. And what's I think also interesting is Huffington had on their polling, only 15% of the audience for the Democrats was Republican, and only 22% of the Trump convention was Democrat. So people watch their own and just ignore the other side.
The Democrats are making a big deal that their TV numbers were bigger overall than the Republican TV numbers overall. Because there's more Democrats in the U.S.
But only 15% of the audience was Republican. So neither convention converted anybody. I mean, you could say those 15% or 22%, but you're looking at very small numbers.
And Barry's right, and I think what we're going to see is that maybe in contrast to, again, 2012 here in Tampa, where Romney didn't get much coming out of the convention, you could easily say that Trump's gotten quite a bounce out of the convention in Cleveland. And now, overall, yeah, the DNC had larger viewership, but on the final night, again, when the star of the show speaks, Hillary actually came short of Donald Trump's numbers, and I think that says a lot about who were the people there to watch, right? So Republicans were obviously there to see what Trump was going to do and say throughout the convention, certainly on the final night. And, I strongly believe that for the Democrats, people wanted to see what Bernie was going to do and what his supporters were going to do and whether there was going to be any unity or not at the end of the convention.
Yeah, and there was some drama, which most conventions the last few years haven't been. I mean, what's the most memorable thing from the 2012 convention here in Tampa? Clint Eastwood in his empty chair. And that's how everybody in most of their coronation. So there was some drama here. So it was good TV in that sense.
And there's a lot of volatility going on in the polls. I think we saw the Trump bump. We haven't seen the bump from the Hillary convention yet.
And the polls will come out soon in the next few days.
We probably need about 2 to 3 weeks for everything to settle down. In the middle of August, we'll have a good idea of where the election is.
I want to ask you all about Bernie Sanders' future. What is his political future? Does he have one? What happens to Bernie Sanders from here on out?
I think he falls into the Ron Paul category, that Republicans had to struggle with for many years. They had to constantly try to win him over, win their supporters over. I think Bernie is going to fall into that same category.
So he's ahead of a movement, but a small movement? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with Barry saying that this is a small faction of the left. It's the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and they're going to be very vocal and very active over the next many cycles that we're going to see coming up, and he's going to be on the thorn on their side for the establishment Democrats.
If Hillary wins, winning always reinforces what you did. So her part of the party will dominate. If she loses, the people are going to blame him, which is what they did with Teddy Kennedy and Carter. But he's not. He's come over and endorsed Hillary Clinton.
Right. He's come over to her side.
Some of the extreme supporters of his aren't all that enthusiastic, but they never are when they lose. And remember, they just lost, so it's still painful when you put a year and a half of your life into volunteering. But he's also old. He doesn't have a lot of time. He's in his 70s, so I think that this was his the high watermark, and then he's going to kind of fade away.
But does he become an elder statesman of the U.S. Senate?
No, he's never been a powerful senator.
You look at it as Sanders, Vermont, independent. And he's going to be independent.
Okay. Well, while in Florida this week, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump made a lot of headlines when he suggested that Russia should use its computer experts to find Hillary Clinton's deleted emails.
I will tell you this. Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing. I think you will probably be rewarded mightily by our press.
Trump later said that he was being sarcastic. A Clinton advisor, though, said this was likely the first time a major presidential candidate has actively encouraged a foreign power to conduct espionage on the United States.
So, Barry, was that sarcasm or was he encouraging espionage?
The only thing that matters is what he says. It doesn't matter what his intent. It matters what the act was. And you just said it. It's the first time anybody can remember the nominee for a major party encouraging a foreign adversary. Russia's not an ally to do espionage. And this is after he said that he wasn't going to honor, just personally abrogate his commander-in-chief, which is why this election is so important, our NATO obligations. I mean, it doesn't matter what his intent was. The act is what's there, and this is why he's unfit to be commander-in-chief. It does matter what you say. Remember when at a private party, Alan Greenspan said there was a rational exuberance and the stock market fell several hundred points? There's a cost to being president. There's a cost to being chairman of the Fed. You have to watch your mouth. Donald Trump doesn't appear able to watch and filter what he says.
This goes to the question of temperament.
And he's not qualified by temperament.
But I would say the second part, you will be rewarded mightily by the press. He's right about that. If Russia did find Clinton's emails, they would be published. Sure, and that's something that really bothers me. I mean, as a journalist, I mean, cyber criminals are criminals. Hell, they're thieves. They're cyber burglars. You know, it's like somebody broke in your house, read your private diary, and then put it all over. But because it's done electronically, it's okay.
But is this like the Pentagon Papers? When you find something like this that exposes the inner workings of a government agency or a political party, is it like the Pentagon Papers?
But the Supreme Court ruled in a 2001 case, 63, I think. I forget the name of the plaintiffs, but you could, if you find some, like these were telephone transcripts, you could publish them. You're free to do it, no matter how you got them.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't change what the content of those emails are. I think they're looking to point the finger at somebody, and I think the first person they thought of was possibly the Russians. That's yet to be proven. And so for Trump to come out and say, and encourage the Russians to do something like that, I think he was just piggybacking on their now kind of wild goose chase into finding out who was behind these email leaks. And he said, hey, certainly in this case it was the Russians, but he's encouraging them because, again, we have yet to find out what was in all of the emails that Hillary deleted.
So you don't think he crossed the line? He didn't cross the line.
No, again, if you've watched Trump over the years, I mean, again, it's just the type of personality he is. And he's broken every political rule this cycle, and I think he's going to continue to do that. And, it certainly hasn't affected him to this point. And I think, really, the people who have watched him, both as a TV personality and a businessman over the years, knows that he's just going to say what comes off the top of his head. And I don't think he meant it in a legitimate way, and I certainly don't think Russia's, paying much attention to what Donald Trump's saying right now.
You're sure about that? You don't think it raises question about his temperament and fitness for the job?
No, I just think he was piggybacking onto the boogeyman of who did or didn't release these emails. And, it so happens that the Democrats feel strongly that it was Russians. That's yet to be proven. And so he was saying, whoever this may have been, in this case,
that's the problem.
There's more there to be found. And I don't think it's the end of that.
And that's because he doesn't care what the facts are. He doesn't care. He just says. People keep trying to compare him as a leader, the cowboy, to Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was able to keep and attract the highest caliber people in foreign service and in government that we've had in centuries. He had Jim Baker. He had Brent Scowcroft. He had George Shultz. These were extraordinarily talented people that reached across the aisle. Trump does not appear to be able to attract anybody of of any level, intellectually or temperamentally, like that. And we get.
I would disagree with that.
And what, Roger Stone? But we're getting off on the emails. It's what he says. He's encouraging an adversary to commit espionage on a Democratic nominee, and that is what's improper.
One other question about Donald Trump's temperament, and that is that this week, as he was watching the convention on Thursday night, said that he wanted to hit somebody, and he wanted to hit the little guy that he was watching on TV. I'm wondering in what context was Donald Trump making that remark about hitting somebody? Do we know? We don't know the context.
I didn't, you know.
And does that go to the question of temperament, too? I mean, because if you have a major party candidate saying they want to hit somebody, what does that say?
When he mocked the disabled reporter, I mean, I have my parents are in their 90s and they have a lot of people that age, and they're all Republicans, and they've never voted for a Democrat. And most of them are going to vote. These are World War II generation. Like my father joined the Navy when he was 18 in 1942. They are just outraged at like the way he treated that reporter. He has no filter, and when you deal with foreign countries and things like that, you have to have a filter. You have to be able to control what you say. And he doesn't, and he's never shown that ability anywhere in his life, whether it be business or in his campaigns. But why would we think at 70 years old he's going to be any different?
I've had Republicans say to me, look, it's just a euphemism, it's a figure of speech, it's sarcasm, don't take it seriously. That's what the Republicans say.
Well, what about when he made the remarks about Megyn Kelly, about her women things, when he made the remarks about the reporter was disabled? There's a series, John McCain, he says, I like heroes that don't get captured. I mean, at some point there's a pattern.
Well, it was the big story at the start of the week of the Democratic Convention. South Florida Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz resigned as chair of the Democratic National Committee, effective with the end of the party's convention.
The move came after WikiLeaks posted hacked DNC emails, which showed party staffers favoring Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders, when the two were still competing with each other for the Democratic presidential nomination.
We know that the voices in this room that are standing up and being disruptive, we know that that's not the Florida that we know.
Wasserman Schultz is now facing a tough primary election battle to Congress with a more liberal opponent, Tim Canova.
So, Joe, does this show that, I mean, was the party right to oust Wasserman Schultz?
Yes. Somebody has to be, you know.
Because the party was taking sides, so at least her part of the party was taking sides in the presidential primary.
I think she woke up that morning, looked in the mirror, and saw a goat. And, you know, when she was hit, you know, that somebody has to take the fall. But again, you know, hacked emails. You know, hack is a nice, polite cyber word for thief. And again, they were publishing it, but they let down a lot of those Sanders supporters. I mean, he's always saying, "It's stacked against us." You know, the deck is stacked, and she was doing the dealing. You know,
Jonathan, this goes to what we were talking about earlier, the divisions within the Democratic Party.
Sure. Yeah, and I think this reinforces a lot of people's suspicions. You know, one thing that I read this week was certainly that, you know, maybe the fix has been in all along. Tim Kaine was actually the chairman of the Democratic Party. He stepped aside for Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and he gave her the nod to take over the party. And now we're seeing possibly that favor being returned in his nomination to vice president. And so it makes you wonder how long this has kind of been in the works. And I think this is just the beginning. I mean, I think not only are there 19,000 plus emails, I think there may be more to come as the election continues.
Anastasia, I've seen some numbers that say that Tim Canova, Debbie Wasserman Schultz's opponent in South Florida, is raising a lot of money in part because of this controversy, and that she's got a tough re-election battle, primary battle within her own party.
Right, and well, I think that seat has always kind of been seen as safe by the DNC, so they're not necessarily going to come to her rescue with a big re-election fund right away to help bail her out. I think she may be in hot water.
You think she could lose? Yeah. All right. Barry, what do you think about this?
Well, the conspiracy theory. First of all, the President Obama chose Kaine. He liked him, and then they wanted to have, Kaine got elected to the Senate and had some other duties, and they wanted to have a woman in there, and she brought the Jewish constituency, which was Obama was having some trouble with. Debbie Wasserman Schultz had no role in picking the vice president of the United States. None. She wasn't.
I didn't say that.
So there was no favor returned. But more importantly, Debbie Wasserman Schultz's national name ID is probably 1%. So nobody knows who she are. So this is the five of us and your audience are the only people that care about this.
But she's on TV all the time.
Right, but nobody knows who Debbie Wasserman Schultz is.
She's the figurehead of the Democratic Party. I think he's severely underestimating her role in all of this, and certainly the influence that she carries.
All right, so Barry, the bottom line on this, to the point that we've been asking about, is the Democratic Party in disarray, and is this a sign that it's in disarray because of what happened to Wasserman Schultz?
No. In fact, 2 weeks prior to this, Hillary Clinton, as the presumptive nominee, chose an individual who moved into the Democratic Party headquarters and is running the party day to day. So even though Debbie was still there, she was only the figurehead. There was a de facto de jure. She was a de facto, but the de jure head, or the opposite was already a Clinton person.
All right. Well, Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid says Central Florida Congressman and fellow Democrat Alan Grayson should drop his bid for a U.S. Senate seat following reports that Grayson physically abused his ex-wife.
The reports of abuse, first published by Politico this week, have increased pressure on Grayson to drop out of the race. Also this week, Grayson lost endorsements from two national progressive organizations. Reid says Grayson is an absolute fraud and says, now having whacked his ex-wife around a few times, I don't know who supports him other than himself. Democratic Party leaders have openly supported Grayson's opponent, Patrick Murphy, in the primary that takes place August 30th, and so far, Grayson has not commented on the allegations.
Jonathan, end of the line for Alan Grayson?
Yeah, and I think it's overdue. I mean, he's been incredibly volatile, controversial throughout the entire time that he's been in Congress. I think on both sides, he's somebody that, even within his own party, that people have been trying to kind of push aside and kind of shove out the door. I think it's certainly a favor here for Democrats. For Republicans, because he's certainly been a thorn in the side of Republicans. But I think especially with this level of controversy in such a tumultuous year that we're having in terms of elections, I think they need to just try to get him out as quickly as possible so they can rally behind Murphy, who also has quite a steep hill to overcome to defeat Senator Marco Rubio, which I don't believe he will.
Barry, would you agree? Is that the end of the line for Grayson?
I think it isn't the end of the line for Grayson. And I think that a lot of people that I've talked to South Florida congressmen who were liberal, and they said they thought he was intellectually equivalent and politically close, but they said his personality was so in the toilet they just couldn't support him. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a pattern. But remember, the party was already supporting his opponent, and so this is just another reason for them to be able to use to get him out of the race, which he's not going to get out. Obama's already doing mailers and robocalls for Patrick Murphy because this is a business, and at the end of the day, the Democrats need Florida to get the Senate. And Patrick Murphy has the opportunity. The stuff about Privileged Patrick is all weak. That's going to go away as soon as he's the nominee.
But a real quick question. Grayson's wife, his current wife, is running for his congressional seat. Does it hurt her chances to win that seat near Orlando? It does. Because
she was not doing well in the polls, and they got married about a month and a half ago, and she changed her name, and then all of a sudden she went way up in the polls.
All right. Well, before we go, what other news stories should we be paying attention to? Joe, let's start with you.
A new story that we were paying attention to and we're not anymore. It was the shooting down in Fort Myers. 17 people shot, 2 killed. It was a hot story, and then when they said, oh, it's not terrorism, they found out just a couple of black gangbangers shooting at each other, and so, okay, no big deal. And so it should be a news story we should be paying attention to, but we're not anymore.
Because usually,
it's off the radar.
When something like that happens, it happened last Sunday night, when something like that happens, the whole nation shuts down and focuses on that story for 2 or 3 days, and that didn't happen because of Democratic convention.
It was that morning, and then when a spokesman for the Fort Myers Police Department said, this is not terrorism, they said, okay, but it is terrorism.
And it is a problem that we shouldn't ignore.
We should be. And those 2 young men who were murdered, there won't be anybody demonstrating, justice for their killers and nothing like that. Right. And that's a new story we should be paying attention to. That's it, but we won't be.
All right, Jonathan, your other big story?
Yeah, again, I'll kind of go back to what we said just a little while ago. I don't think this is the end of the WikiLeaks story. I think there's more to come out. I think that, they may be waiting timing-wise, maybe for another big moment in the campaign to drop another set of emails or voicemails. And so this is going to be an incredibly fascinating part of the election cycle that could severely impact this campaign.
Does this show that the Russian spy guys are doing the bidding of the Republican Party by getting this info? I mean, do you think that part of the story is true?
No, I think it's almost ludicrous to think that the Russians are behind this and that they're trying to manipulate our elections. I think honestly, it's maybe the anonymous group. It's Bernie Sanders supporters that maybe are in line with the anonymous group. I think they're going to find out real quick that none of this leads back to Moscow. It's going to be right here at home, and it's people that didn't like Hillary and they were trying to get Bernie in there. And at the end of the day, it's going to be interesting to see what impact it has on the race long term.
All right, Anastasia, your big story?
Well, I think everybody is going to be looking for those emails to see if they do exist. I think, next week we're going to be focused on what the post-DNC bump, if Hillary Clinton's got it, if she's going to get those Bernie Sanders supporters under her wing.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting. Barry, your other big story?
I think it's going to have a more profound effect that people have really thought about is Roger Ailes' departure from Fox. They make so much money. Are they, by being hyper-partisan, do they change the model and try to clean it up and make it a more mainstream journalism, or do they continue on as they are? I think that's the big question.
And Rupert Murdoch's sons want to move it to center-right. They don't want it as far-right as it currently is.
And it'll be interesting if they do that because they're making money by doing what they're doing now.
All right, so they shouldn't give up on their very conservative audience.
I think they should move it to center-right. I'd like to see them do that, have everybody go to the center. I've been called a raging centrist, but apparently you make money by being on the far extreme, so we'll see.
All right, well, thanks everybody for a great show, and thank you for watching Florida This Week. You can always find this show online at wedu.org. Please send us your comments to ftw@wedu.org and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. And join us again next Friday night at 8:30 and Sunday afternoon at 12:30. And remember, Monday is the deadline to register to vote in the Florida primary. And from all of us here at WEDU, have a great weekend.
Florida This Week is a production of WEDU, who is solely responsible for its content.